Hello, and welcome to Sacred Herbalism, the full moon segment of the Elder Tree podcast, where we explore how plants and fungi can support us to enter into a sacred relationship with life and the living world. I'm your host, Stephanie Hazel, herbalist, anthropologist, and a deep lover of this wild world. Let's walk into the moonlit forest together, into a world of magic, mysticism, psychedelic teachers, and, of course, the plants themselves. Are you ready? Good morning. Good morning, Taj and Daisy, and thanks so much for being here on this first ever multi-guest podcast format for the Elder Tree podcast to talk about this really awesome topic that Daisy suggested, which is wildcrafting as an act of rebellion. And I've been sitting with this topic for weeks now because it's been quite the journey finding the time when our calendars all overlap. And what I've been thinking about is the history of the commons throughout, especially England and European history, and how important this land, forests, fields, farms, lakes, wetlands, bogs throughout Europe, these large swathes of land that until the 15th century were actually ownerless. There was no personal ownership of most of the land. And these areas of land, the commons, were considered to be common shared property. And in that land, people would forage for fuel and firewood. They would, wildcraft herbs and mushrooms and berries. They would go hunting. They would take their pigs to, snuffle up all the acorns. Or they would cut peat from the peat bogs. And from this point in history, we're like, wow, that, some of us might think that sounds enchanted. Some of us might think that sounds really chaotic and disorganized. But of course, when you have land-based communities who have multiple generations in the same land, you end up with these very complex webs of relationships, responsibilities, much more like we would see in indigenous cultures than what we currently have in the West, right? Where different people are considered stewards of different aspects of that, and there's inherent sociological kind of checks and balances that stops any one group from taking advantage of that shared land. And so I feel like wildcrafting, especially when we talk about wildcrafting as an act of rebellion, sits inside that kind of historical landscape. And then from about the 1500s, even then worse in like the 1700s, when Britain started sheep farming to build their empire and to get, to be able to have the wealth to go across the seas and conquer other lands, they needed to have all of this wealth that was mainly with sheep. And to do that, they needed to start enclosing the commons, and they became private property. And then hunting got called poaching, wildcrafting became stealing, and people would be, hanged and killed in response to poaching on the Lord's land. It's a huge, huge cultural shift that happened in that time that some people say is the origin, the beginning of kind of capitalism and modern land ownership, where every bit of land pretty much is owned. And if it's not, you don't have any rights to it. We have very restricted rights to go into a national park. It's illegal to go and harvest things in a national park, right? And it's definitely illegal to go on private property. So then where does that leave us as wildcrafters? I might just hand over to Taj for a moment. What do you have to say in response to that?
Oh wow, I think about this quite a lot actually, and especially because I think about the idea of ownership a lot, and how tricky that is in living in a capitalist society. But I've also thought about this in relation to the commons quite a bit, and how because I have a background in permaculture, one of the things that I had started to not necessarily sit right with me, even though I think that it's one of the best models that we may have currently. One of the things that didn't sit as well with me was when I actually realized that agriculture was the birth of a lot of what I consider problems in the world. It was the birth of hierarchies. It was the birth of the enclosure of the commons. It was the birth of, a lot more strife as well. And then it was basically the foundations of what we have as modern capitalism. And so it was interesting being someone that, was starting to participate in an agricultural kind of model that permaculture is, and then starting to understand that I actually really also wanted to bring in a lot of rewilding into my work, even though I also understand that now we don't have enough wild places to actually support people and to support people's food and lifestyle needs. But how do we actually incorporate at least some of this into our lives and our lifestyles? Because then I think that not only is it has all of these health benefits, which I'll talk about, because wild medicines are so different to cultivated foods for a variety of reasons, but it also creates this connection, because when you actually start to have a relationship with what is going on in wild or even semi-wild spaces, you become aware of what is at stake. And if we don't have that, then I feel like we become enclosed. And this is what I think that ownership has really done as well. We become very disconnected. Now we see, like, it's funny because we have ownership and people are sold this false sense of independence. So it's like, oh, if you own it, then like you're independent. But it's because you paid for it, and it's because someone else somewhere actually made it, but you don't see that person and you don't see those hands.
Mm.
But if you have a direct relationship with the landscape and with the communities around you, you actually start to see that we are all connected. And I think that that's really important for the future protection of our ecosystems.
I like that you said if we don't do things like that, if we don't wildcraft and we don't engage with wild land and wild food, then we become enclosed, which is kind of the name that, the enclosure was the name of all that land becoming enclosed and losing the commons. So it's kind of what we do to the land, we do to ourselves in some way. Daisy, what does wildcrafting mean to you? What is wildcrafting?
Ah, yeah, that's a great question. And funny enough, I haven't even been contemplating that. It's just something that's so innate in my nature is to track space and time through plants. But wildcrafting is really a, a pathway home to that wholeness, as you just mentioned. But it's also a way of separating ourselves from consumerism and colonialism, and to create this deep sense of independence and interdependence with what's actually really important is that our nature, and living more seasonally, and honoring what's actually around us. How can we cultivate our here now presence with our food source and claim back our rights? So, in a way, I kind of like the word revolutionary more than rebellion, because it kind of, it feels like it's an evolution rather than just like an endless rebellion in some ways. But that's something we could unpack. But definitely for me, it feels so innately natural to be sourcing our nutrient and our relationship from our immediate environment, and to support that ongoingly through seeds and propagation and really mindful cultivation of the craft, of the plants.
What have you been wild harvesting lately? What's been on your summer wild harvesting journeys?
Well, I love watercress. Like, watercress is one of my favorite things, and so whenever I'm near creeks and streams, it's definitely something that I'm seeking and looking for. Although we do need to be mindful to not wildcraft watercress from sheep country, that you were interestingly, because they carry the liver fluid, which watercress can pick up and carry actually. So it's something to be mindful of. But it's raspberry season, it's blackberry season right now. Like, it's so wonderful to go out on the trails and to be picking these gifts, that just these delicious very sweet gifts. And also the nettles. It's like nettle. I think it was one of the saviors in the Second World War, and probably throughout all of the wars. Nettle has been like this incredible go-to plant, so highly nutritious. Um, so it's been really nice to build a relationship with that, because in Australia we do have a lot of European herbs that have migrated over here. Thank God, as a wildcrafter, because otherwise I think Australian native foods often require quite a lot of work, and having these immigrants come over has been such a treasure, because it means that we do have so many other food sources in our wildcrafting capacity, whether it's like dandelions, a lot of the berries and different things like that. Um,
What have you been wildcrafting, Taj?
I've been wildcrafting. It's just started into elderberry season, so that's very exciting. It's always a really exciting time of year. And St. John's wort as well. St. John's wort is like a quite a uh, what's considered an invasive species here, like because it can be quite noxious. So one of the things that I really love about wildcrafting as well is that it, I can actually choose which plants to wildcraft that I'm not going to grow, for example. And hawthorn, like, so hawthorn is just starting to come into its haw or berry season. They're not exactly ripe yet, but I can start to see them ripening. And that's another one. I would never plant hawthorn here because it can be so problematic. And same as St. John's wort, but I can go off into the landscape and I can feel as though I'm actually being part of even if it is a little bit of a small solution for this as well. So yeah, there are a few things
So do
that
you
I've
mean
been.
that when you're going out and harvesting kind of invasive plants like hawthorn and St. John's wort, um, then blackberries, that we're actually reducing the veracity of their spread. So we're then kind of keeping them under control a little bit. And if enough people were doing that and engage in that relationship with those plants, they'd be a little less problematic.
Yeah, I think that, like, I don't I don't want to fool myself into thinking like that, this what I'm doing is actually a control method, because I think that in order to really put in order to, like, I don't even like that word control, but you get what I'm saying. In order to control them, I think that we've got to be really mindful about what we're planting in their place, and what niches where, if we don't want this niche to be filled by hawthorn, then what native plant are we filling that with, etc. And it's a whole science, and I don't want to, elude myself that I'm actually contributing wholeheartedly to this science. However, I do like to think that there is a small gift that I am offering with that. And yes, I do think that if more people did that and were aware of which plants to wildcraft at certain times and which plants not to, and just ethical practice around wildcrafting, then perhaps we would actually see more of a tending to landscape.
And as you said, that but being in relationship with.
Mm.
Um, and on the other hand, as by the like I kind of by the by, but I do think when we look at, okay, hawthorn is invasive in Victoria in that way, and it's a bit problematic in the landscape, but it's probably less problematic than the chemical repercussions on the environment and of making a whole bunch of statins, putting everybody on statins to prevent heart disease. We could be wild harvesting hawthorn, and it's hard to measure the difference in the environmental impact between those two kinds of very different production methods, but it is really worth considering.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I know that one of the things with hawthorn here in Victoria is because it can carry, I think it's a slug, and proliferate a slug that actually deteriorates orchards as well. So not only does it maybe perhaps like have the environmental consequences, and I definitely get what you're saying with, like, it might be a better solution sometimes to the environmental ramifications of certain pharmaceuticals. However, then sometimes it starts to impact our food industry in certain ways, and so there's just it's very nuanced. And sometimes I think that people will think because it's natural, it's good. And like to encourage inquiry into what is truly going on ecosystemically, socially, economically. It's very actually quite complex systems. And I know that we can't all do that as individuals, but this is why it's so wonderful to get to know sometimes one plant at a time, and make deep inquiries into those plants, because then we start to really understand what their position is within a landscape, and rather than just the blanket one-page monograph.
So, would you recommend when harvesting a quote unquote invasive species like hawthorn, because I think we'd often hear about wildcrafting and being really careful not to over harvest and being really respectful, but maybe with something like hawthorn, it would be better to, cut back the plant as you're harvesting and take big swathes of it home and then take the berries and, compost what's remaining, rather than just very mindfully not taking too much, right? So I think to your point, you're talking about knowing the species that you're working with, that you're harvesting well, so you know what's most appropriate.
Mm.
Yeah, the yeah, definitely. And I think that a lot of our wildcrafting information comes from Northern America as well. There's not as much, like, there are people wildcrafting here for sure. We're all here, but there's not as much information on it, and there's not as much science on this as well. And the indigenous plants of Australia, and the like endemic species here, and the invasive species. So I do think that, yeah, it with certain plants we can actually be doing a favor. Like when I go to harvest hawthorn, I don't really I think about mindful harvesting, but I don't think about whether I'm over harvesting this plant, because especially because there's so much of it where I live.
Beautiful. I've been harvesting, to answer my own question, I've been wild harvesting this summer, lots of bunya nuts. It was a good bunya season, making, it's quite a journey. I got to sit there with, Reese and I sat with the kids and we pretended we were a family of black cockatoos, and we played these elaborate games of like shucking, getting the kids involved in shucking the bunya nuts, and, making a whole story. And then, of course, Ariane, my 4-year-old, anytime there's a sprout, she wants to go and throw it in the forest because she wants them to grow. It's very sweet, but it's a lot of processing. But as Reese was saying, there's something feels really sane about gathering food from the land, especially the natives that are like in deep ecological relationship here. And especially the bunyas, because there's so much processing, people can't be bothered. So they drive around here this time of the year, well, not so much now, a few months ago around Christmas, and there were just bunya nuts lying on the roadside. People are driving over them. So we've been gathering some, and even some friends of mine are like, "Oh, you're making bunya nut stuff. Do you want to come get a bunch from my place?" I'm like, "Oh." Each cone takes hours of shucking and then piercing and then boiling and then peeling, and then you can do something with it, right? And they're delicious and they're nutritious, and I love them. But it's a lot of labor. It'd be, if I costed that out hourly, right? And this is something interesting with wildcrafting. If you cost it out hourly, it's often really expensive when we're taking it from a commercial or capitalist framework. But there's something that feels so sane about sitting there and receiving and processing what the land is offering and making use of it, and spending your time with your hands on those gifts from the earth. It felt like such a reset to our dopamine pathways, Daisy.
And it just made me, yeah, thinking of the bunya nuts and nuts, which are generally more work. It's also a reminder to slow down and value how much nutrition is actually inside each of these things.
Mm.
Because in modern, we just get a bag of nuts and we just eat way too many. Like the amount of nuts and things that come out of hard, like often long processing, is actually much higher and denser nutrition. So we need less. So it actually reminds us to be really mindful. Is like, what do I actually need? Like, what does my body, how much can my body actually digest of this particular thing? And I love how nature shows us that by packing some of these more nutrient dense things in more difficult packaging to slow us down and remind us of the value of the thing that we are actually taking.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's hard to overeat nuts if you're having to shell them by hand, but it's easy if they're like salted and roasted in a bowl. Like you can get a lot of macadamias in and get a tummy ache if you just have them all ready to go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a beautiful point.
Yeah.
Thanks, Daisy.
We've got acorn season coming up here. So because we don't have the bunyas, we don't. Oh, well, we've got two bunya trees on the farm, and they're so small they don't grow very fast here. However, the oak trees are a really amazing source of folate and fats with the acorns, and they also require a lot of processing and a lot of leaching of the tannins, and it's a beautiful thing to do with other people. And I think that this is one of the things that wildcrafting foraging teaches us, is that we need other hands to actually make our to meet our nutritional needs, and we always have. And it's kind of a fallacy now that we don't think that we do, or like, we're so far removed from it that we think that we only require ourselves to like prepare something. But in this globalized system, which might actually start disintegrating soon, we see how fragile that system really is. And even though the foraging is quite time consuming, it is building resilient threads, because we start to gain those skills, we start to understand what's around us, we start to localize our food systems more so, and we realize that we've actually got more of a foundation than perhaps what we think that we've had for a long time with a global system.
Yeah, I mean, as Daisy said, you buy a bag of nuts and they're all shelled. Someone has shelled those nuts, and there's a lot of it's easy in the globalized system that we're in to invisibilize all the labor and all the hands and all the humans, and let alone all the more than human and the non-human creatures and beings, but even just all the humans whose hands have touched those that on their journey to us, right? And I think that is beautiful. When we process food that we've collected and wild harvested, there's a communality around it, and it rebuilds social networks. Nothing bonds quite like surviving together, right? And you see that after, the floods up here, bushfires, people feel much more connected to their communities after disasters where you've survived, you've pitched in together and survived. And we have that in our nuclear families, but we don't extend survival very often to our greater community anymore.
And together we're better in every way.
I feel like we've touched on, wildcrafting as an act of rebellion against kind of capitalism and the consumerism, right? Like I think that is, we could go into that a bit more. But then something that I also thought around our mental health and our well-being, and I mentioned before around the dopamine with the harvesting, processing the bunya nuts. It's quite satisfying. You pop them out, and they pop, and you get this big bowl of nuts. Was reflecting that actually that's what our dopamine is for. This entire network of reward systems that is designed to encourage wildcrafting in us as wild beings. And when you are walking through the forest, or you're walking through the field, wherever you're walking, whatever landscape you're walking through, and you are hunting a particular plant, and you see that blackberry, or you see that, gotu-kola. It's gotu-kola all over my place at the moment. Or my daughter's really excited about the lily pillies are fruiting at the moment, and they're so, fluoro pink, and there's something, she's like, oh, there's one. And you can see this joy that we can, map across to the neurochemistry of dopamine. And so I feel like that's a really healthy reset, because in so many ways that pathway is being hijacked by our devices. And you look at something like Candy Crush, or there's all these games which are all about colors and recognizing and finding the thing you're looking for. And it's basically mimicking in some way the inner satisfaction that we can get from wildcrafting, right?
Love that.
And say even with our social media, right? You scroll it down, like, what's around the corner? What am I going to find around the corner? Is this going to be the thing I'm looking for, right? Yes, I think it can be a great way to support mental health and detaching from addictive screen use. Taj?
Yeah, I think about this quite a lot because I think that the I think a lot about the magic of subtlety. I think magic is subtle, and I think that we're taught that a lot of magic and awe and wonder comes from uh, something way more explosive and stimulating. When if you start to attune yourself to the subtleties of the world, you realize that you actually don't need much. And this, I think, comes through with the act of wildcrafting, the joy that you can find from like quote unquote hunting a plant, and going through and I used to do this thing when I was starting to learn about herbalism where I deliberately wouldn't read about a plant until I found it. And it was joyous because whenever I would find the plant in the wild, I'd go, it was almost like a key had been unlocked, like a gateway or a door. And I'd go, okay, I've gained access to that now. I'm allowed in a way to get to know you. And like, this is the permission in a way, because if I can't know you physically, how do I truly understand you? And so then it would like unlock this door, and then I'd go and like pour over all my books on this plant. But the what I would learn about the plant in the context of a landscape was like so much more or just as much as I would learn from a book. And the sense of wonder and awe and appreciation that I would feel when I was doing that was just, yeah, it's unsurpassable.
Yeah, I'd love to add on to that for both of the comments. Last month, I was walking on a trail up here, and there was this incredible purple all through the stream. And it was like, what is that? It's so beautiful, just the beauty of the color. And then I got down into the stream, and it was all these purple variety of lily pilly, thousands of them, all bustled and eddied in around the rocks in the stream. And so I'm sad I didn't mention that when you asked me, what have you been wildcrafting? Lily pillies, like literally just, I had my whole skirt full of wet lily pillies that nature had perfectly gathered and washed and was just waiting for me to come and collect them, you know? It's just, and I was like, okay, that's good. It's like lily pillies planted next to streams or things that naturally drop off. Like, I have so many cherry guavas and things like this in my orchard. You miss a few days, you leave them for a week and they're all on the ground. You know what I mean? And it's kind of like how to harvest those. And it really brought it was like, oh, what about if we use the streams more? Like, yes, look into the streams of what they've naturally harvested, but what can we propagate near streams and little eddies where they can be naturally harvesting for us, and that we can just come and collect and gather, because that was truly a fabulous day. I have to
What
admit.
did you do with the lily pillies?
I actually ate them and gave them away, but I really, and I had intended to go back and make jam,
Hmm.
but I just life got away, and I didn't get back. And when I did eventually get back there, there was not the abundance that was dropped when I was there. And I think that is also one of the lessons of nature is if it's here now, it's time for action.
Mm.
We can't sit in, oh, I'll do that next week. It's like it season's on. It's like we're on. We have to act now in accordance to the timing and feeling that beckoning, and it really does bring such an innate pleasure of life. So I love that you put those to the Candy Crush. I've never played that, but yeah, and wildcrafting together, because it makes sense. It's like, yeah, you're seeking these colors in these places and points, and it's like, because I definitely feel like that when I'm out in nature finding the edible treasures.
Yeah, I love what you've said about the immediacy of it, and and having to let go our own agendas. Taj.
Mm. Yeah, the immediacy, the presence that wildcrafting demands. I love this. It extends to gardening as well, but I think that there's a difference with wildcrafting. You know, it can be fleeting. Like it shows you that like how ephemeral the seasons are, and blink and you'll miss it kind of thing. Where it also in our current social constructs, we are expected to like everything's at the same pace kind of all of the time. We're just expected to like keep going, and things can, yeah, I think that there's a capitalist ideology of time that we have that doesn't fit with wildcrafting. Wildcrafting demands presence, and you do have to stop and say, okay, no, I have to do this now, which can be actually really hard in the current framework because you're trying to keep this routine based lifestyle going as well as wildcrafting at the same time. And it doesn't always lend to that. Sometimes we will miss things, and it can be really disappointing because as foragers or wildcrafters, we know that we don't get that in our dispensaries or apothecaries or kitchens for the rest of the year if we miss it.
Hmm. Yeah, rebellion against the changes in our way we relate to time. Someone told me recently, I think they were in Africa, and a friend of mine's been in Kenya, and this Kenyans were saying to him, "Yeah, you white people, you've got the watches, but we've got the time." And I
Love
which I
it.
love
That's
so
great.
much because I feel like everyone in my life around me, like sometimes I need to book a social hangout with some of my closest friends like 5 weeks in advance because everyone has no time, none. And it's like, how is that possible that we have no time for just sharing a meal? Like, don't we all sit down to get every day to have a meal? And that lack of time is something that I think we really need to start unwinding in our culture today. And maybe wildcrafting is a way to start changing that because as you know, as Daisy said, there's an immediacy. You can't say, well, I'll come back and make jam next week with the lily pillies. I have other plans. I've planned there are things I planned months ago that I have to do today. I can't make jam. It's like, well, no, nature's not like that. And also, as we were talking before about the slowness and the amount of time it takes to process some of these plants, acorns and bunias, especially the starches and the nuts and those things, it's so much time, but there's a joyousness in it. Like it's a sane time. So how do we engage with wildcrafting as an invitation to remap our inner concepts of how we engage with time so that we can give away our watches a bit more and reclaim a bit more of that time?
I actually, yeah, I think about this quite often because one of the things that I value the most is the way I spend my time. And I always have. I'm like, I'm going to die. The sun's going to blow up. Why the hell would I spend time doing something that I really doesn't feel well, like, or something that I really don't enjoy, and I know there's certain things that we all don't enjoy that we have to do sometimes, don't get me wrong, but I don't want to dedicate my life and my time to especially other people's success. I don't want to do that. I would like to spend my time with people I love or doing things that are creative or things that feel really fulfilling to me. And there is something about wildcrafting and cooking and being with people that really feels that. It's a sense of community, it's a sense of meaning, it's a sense of groundedness. And I do feel as though it's a little bit of an act of rebellion towards the time constraints we have now because we're sold all of these things. And it's been like this for so long. We're sold all of these things that are going to give us more time. It's going to make life easier. And every time there's a new one, it's like, people have like dishwashers and washing machines. And, we're like, oh, we're going to save time. And now, there's AI and we're going to save more time. But it's doing the opposite. More is expected of us constantly. And I would like to lower those expectations of myself, which I often find difficult, but I don't want to carry on the kind of legacy that is being perpetuated by that thinking. I would rather think about, okay, what's the quality of time that we have, how are we spending that? I would like to shock some acorns with you.
I would love to speak to that about what you've both just mentioned is with the time, and it's really a calling back to the village, because when we're in the village, we're also not a 20-minute drive away, an hour and a half a drive away, which is something that's required. But when we're living locally and with our people in a village situation, we walk out of our home and here are our people, and we're automatically here in the bosom or the womb of our community, and in right timing with who we're meant to be spending, who we share an adventure with or a crafting piece with. And I lived like that in Thailand for many years in a very small community where there was no roads or shops, and it's like we never carried phones, we never had shoes on, and we had each other, and we never planned when we were going to see or who we were going to see, because we were actually available, and we were seen in daily life. And it's like that's truly the greatest gift another human being can give to another human being is our presence. So the more we spend time together in presence, in effortless presence, then what bubbles out of that is so rich and so creative and effortless. So I think it's like, yeah, it's our presence, our patience, and our purpose all gets woven in together in living in a smaller situation where we're not expected to go off on these big missions all the time and find this external life. Like there was definitely a lie sold to us that, or having the washing machine and the dishwasher and the commercially grown food was going to save us time and give us more valuable time. It's like, how much do we need to work to purchase those things, and the balance of that.
I'm just going to jump in defense of washing machines. And if you have ever
Oh,
tried
don't,
to wash a load of sheets by hand, but I have when I was
I
a
have,
young,
definitely.
dreadlocked, radical hippie. I'm like, I don't need washing machines. That's the patriarchy, capitalism. Oh my God. I tried it once and I was like, wow, that took me all day to wash this set of sheets.
You can
But
get these amazing foot-driven washing machines, so it's a barrel,
Mm.
and you just use your foot to
awesome. Yeah,
to
yeah.
drive it, and so, yeah, I think that's a good solution.
That said, I'm sure that a lot of important community making happened down by the rivers or where women were hanging out and washing clothes together. And also, they probably wore their clothes many times before washing and only had like 3 different changes of clothes anyway. So now we need washing machines to deal with our piles of possessions. Um, I want to, I guess, reframe and reflect back what I've heard from both of you around the reclamation of time and the remapping with time. I think there is something really important there about, you know, everyone's so busy trying to pay for, and, actually it used to be trying to pay for luxuries, but now a dishwasher, you can get a dishwasher for like $300, which is so much less than I pay on interest every week for my place, right? So it's actually, I think now it's a bit like, well, why not have all the luxuries? Because they're so much more affordable than just my basic living costs. But then we are trapped into a system of having to work so hard to pay for all the things we're told we have to have. We have no time for each other, no time for our children. And it was so beautiful to have a whole week where every day in the afternoon we played black cockatoos as a family and we processed these things, and we were like, oh, what are we going to make tonight with the bunya nuts? And I bet, in that time I was thinking, next year, I forget, it was like one of the pagan festivals happened around there, maybe Litha or something. I was like, next year I'm going to have a bunya festival on this day. I'm going to tell all my friends to go and bring at least 4 bunya cones. Come for the weekend, we'll all hang out, we'll process the bunya cones, we'll sit around the fire, we'll tell stories, we'll sing songs, we'll cook lots of yummy food. And that in a way, I think, is what we're talking about. It's like the village, and it's doing these things together creates that sense of play, not work, and creates a sense of spaciousness in our inner world, our inner relationships with each other, with land, with time, right? And I just want to say, Daisy, I always really respected that about you, that you're someone who uh, is, I think, very wise in the world of time. You always seem to have so much time up your sleeve to like have luxurious mornings of yoga and qigong and lying in the sun and making. And I just sometimes like, how does she do that? How does she manage to not just be caught up in this rat race story all the time? So I want to just honor that in you, because I think you do that better than most people. I mean, you also don't have little people, but even if you had little people, even people who don't have little people, we get caught up in this story, right? And so, yeah, you've managed to rewrite that story in yourself in a really beautiful way.
Yeah, well, and that was born out of overextension. You know, I was raised where it's like you got to work hard to get anything. So I worked full time from 12 to 18 and ended up in hospital with stomach ulcers and colitis and all of these things. So what came out of that was being in a ward full of 60 plus, like people in their 60s and plus, and the nurse going, "Look around you, you have an old person stress related disease. You need to change your life." And at that point, I heard this: live a holiday lifestyle and function in the mundane world. And it's like, oh, how much time do I actually need to put in to function in the mundane world, but actually have a rich day to day life, which is really healthy and nourishes the nervous system. And I think, you know, we're sold this lie of independence, you know, and many of us have a survival strategy of aloneness. I'm safe when I'm alone, but actually, that's a strategy. It's not actually true. We are safest in community, surrounded by each other in co regulation. And that's what happens when we come together to shuck the corn and do the peas and the bunya nuts. It is this co regulation, which is so, so deeply healing. So, yeah, take the time if you can, those moments to bathe in the sun and to take the pauses. It's definitely been a massive theme for my life because I get overwhelmed otherwise. I'm sensitive. But I do feel like the more I pause, it's in the pauses that the opportunities come in. It's like when I'm actually in my big, deep, restful times, because I swing between workaholism and spaciousness. It's like when I'm resting and in my spaciousness, that's when the opportunities come in. You know, the phone's like someone's like, "Oh, hey, would you please come and teach at this festival, or can you do a retreat here, or you do?" And it's usually when that happens is actually when I'm nourishing and restoring
Mm.
myself. There's a space for it to come into then. So there's something in that.
I definitely agree about the co-regulation as well, Daisy. And this is one of the things that I have really learnt in teaching courses and facilitation is that I leave spaces. So whenever we're medicine making, or it would be harvesting or wildcrafting and medicine making, I give people instruction and then I leave them and to do it together, because it's those moments of togetherness, which is a co-regulation happens. And there's something ancient and ancestral about being with people and harvesting or making things. And I don't want to take up that space with a lecture. I want to give that space for people to feel restored by the nourishing sensation that they're having with the plants and with the community. And it happens. And I watch it every single time. And it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, love that. So, what are the risks of wildcrafting? What are some problematic things that we need to be aware of?
Okay. So the problematic things are obviously a lot of people will always ask about pollution and will ask about spraying and roadsides, waterways, this kind of thing. So pollution is definitely something to be mindful of. Uh, in my mind now, I personally think we can't go to some utopia that's not polluted, where there's also a degree of uh, coexisting that we have to do. However, we also just need to be able to practice mindfulness about the way that we want to do that and how much exposure we are having. yeah, we also want to be able to nourish our bodies. It's one of the reasons why people get into wildcrafting in the first place, so we don't want to be doing more damage. However, we also have to be in the world. There's a certain degree, I think, of acceptance, and a certain degree of caution without becoming neurotic, because it can go the other way. So yeah, definitely the pollution picture. Definitely people get worried about spraying. So I will often encourage people to look for the signs of spraying, or be able to call their councils to see if certain reserves and things like that have been sprayed. Glyphosate doesn't actually live in the soil and exchange through the soil. So people get quite worried that, how long is it going to take? Is it going to be in the soil and then it's just going to constantly affect the plants that live there? But it doesn't. But it does cause a problem on the foliage, definitely, if it has been sprayed recently, or even if there's residue on the foliage. So that's something to be aware of.
And just to be clear, glyphosate, if you are ingesting it, it does really damage the gut lining and cause leaky gut and all kinds of food intolerances and things like that, as far as I'm
And
aware.
neurological issues, yeah.
And neurological issues. So banned all through Europe. I went for a lovely walk the other day, early morning walk along the rail trail, this beautiful kind of what used to be the old train line from Wollongbar all the way through to Mullum, I think, and now it's a beautiful walking track. And I was going for a lovely morning walk, and there was a guy with his little buggy just spraying Roundup, and I had to really, process that. I felt quite panicked. And I did feel to point out to him, Roundup's banned in Europe, don't you? And he was like,
Yeah, we're not, like, a lot of people here aren't taught, the education isn't there to, and people are given these jobs. Like, I often think about the people that have those jobs, and I'm like,
yeah.
oh, the risks of the exposure are like far greater for them than us walking
Totally.
past sometimes as
I
well,
felt
and
I
we're
would have
getting
loved to look at
panicked
his
about
tongue,
it.
actually. Well, excuse me, would you mind showing me your tongue?
Oh.
Would have been kind of weird and creepy, but yeah. So definitely
Not to
signs of
notice.
spraying, like, there being swathes of dirt with nothing growing. That's, which then I did notice on this path. Oh, isn't that interesting how there are no weeds in any of the pebbles? That's a sign. And what about, like close by here, there's a road that's like access to a community, an MO, and along that road there's heaps of the native elderflowers, the Sambucus australis, and I'd say there's probably like 40 houses down there, so that cars do go up and down there kind of really regularly. What do you think that level of car fumes and heavy metal potential toxicity would be? Would you harvest there? Would you not harvest there?
I don't know if you want to talk about this, Daisy.
Yeah.
Oh, I was waiting for Taj. You
Yeah.
sound more scientific. You sound much more educated in that department. So I'm like,
Uh,
gorgeous.
but you're experienced as well, so I think that
Oh, come on.
it's just a different experience.
I what are your thoughts on that, Taj?
So if it was by a roadside that you're
Mm.
saying,
Is a
yeah,
small roadside. It's a private community road.
yeah, usually down roadsides, if it is, I just think about the traffic, like, and I don't necessarily have, kind of like a data point for this or anything, but it's more so about the traffic and how used the road is. So if it is just a small local road that has, a few cars going down it every, half an hour or something like that, I won't be as worried. It's more so if I'm thinking about highways, or sometimes train lines, or yeah, just really, really busy roadsides. And I also try and think about the runoff. So is the plant growing within the just right along the roadside where it has the runoff, and what could that runoff be carrying as well, because it's sometimes about the water and not just about the car fumes. And the other thing is the part of the plant that you're harvesting as well, and its exposure. So especially if you're worried about things that are within the soil, then if you're worried about like a heavy metal toxicity or certain buildup in the soil, which you can actually get testing for if you're worried about your own plot. Obviously, you're not going to go test for like every reserve. But if you are worried about places being an industrial area or runoff, then there's also the parts of the plant. I wouldn't be harvesting roots, for example, because the roots are going to be have direct exposure. And then the higher that it goes up um, the development of the plant, for example, if it gets to an elder and you're looking at the elder berries, then that will have much lower levels of toxicity than the roots will. So I will often think about this as well in their development stages.
Something that's coming up for me actually amongst all this awesome practical information, thanks Taj, that's really useful, just guideposts for people. But we're talking about how wildcrafting can help us to feel embedded and become more embedded in our local environment. And part of that is the toxicity of our local environment. Like being embedded in our landscapes, it's a myth that we can embed ourselves in a way that is only going to have the benefits of that. We actually are already embedded. I walk down that road where those elderberries grow, and I'm breathing that air. Like I'm already embedded in that landscape. And this is something that I definitely struggle with. The search for purity is something that's in my psyche. And causes me no end of harm. And anyone hasn't listened to my interview with Miriam called Purity Disconnects Us from the World, it's a very powerful episode. And we go into that idea really deeply. And I think that's really relevant here, right? Like, yes, when we wild harvest, we wildcraft, we are exposing ourselves to what is in the environment, good and bad. We are connecting ourselves into that web and all that entails. And we have this idea that if we're buying like organic chamomile from the shop, which most chamomile comes from Egypt, this idea that that's somehow this protected environment. But it's not. It's also part of the landscapes everywhere, right? Um, so yeah, that's just there for me around embedding ourselves in all the elements of the environment, and that we can't actually hunt for purity without harming ourselves in a more psychological way.
And I think going back to your original question about what are the challenges or the detriments of wildcrafting is inadvertently spreading weedy things, like I was thinking what came to mind was prickly pear. Like the whole plant is edible. It's delicious. The pears are incredible, but also the pads are an edible piece. And I was talking to a cactus person, like an environmental scientist, at a fair out in Lightning Ridge a few months back. And I was like, oh, this one's got a really delicious edible fruit. And she goes, no, it doesn't. No. And I'm like, well, actually it doesn't. She goes, but don't tell anyone. If people know, then they might start spreading it. So to also be mindful when you are harvesting these invasive species, then yes, remove the thing completely. That you do actually have permission, things like prickly pear that are actually super invasive and really damaging to the environment, that you may wish to take them completely with your harvesting and not inadvertently spread them, so you might just be harvesting in a different area. You've stopped on the roadside and picked all these prickly pears and then driven to another place where they don't exist, and left seeds or a pad, and then started its system in a new place where it previously didn't have the problem. So I think this is really, really important, is looking at where I wouldn't have an issue, like with watercress, one of my favorites, spreading seeds in that, because like animals eat it. It's, it often, it kind of rises and falls, and it's not invasive. It's not damaging to the environment. So I'm like, yeah, little watercress here in this waterway and that waterway. But as far as like prickly pear and hawthorn, that can carry the slugs. So we really need to know what we're wildcrafting, what are the pests and things associated with it, and the environments where they become really detrimental.
What do you think, Taj, about the idea of spreading watercress seeds into waterways?
I haven't got much experience here with watercress, to be honest. So I know that it does grow, but I haven't done my like little deep dive into it. So I don't really know, and I don't really know. I know that me and Daisy live in a completely different climate as well, so it might actually spread differently or have different animals or ecosystems that are indulging in this plant. So I'm really not sure. Mm.
Yeah, my experience with watercress is it's so fleeting.
Mm.
It's like everybody loves it. So if it does happen to take root somewhere, eventually an animal will come and find and just decimate it because it's because it's so palatable and delicious, and flooding also just you know destroys it. So yeah, I
Yeah,
find
it's
it
very delicate, isn't it?
so delicate. Like I haven't done it yet, but my plan on my creek is to actually make a little bamboo raft for the watercress, because every time we get flooding or a heavy rain, the watercress that I've been tending to just gets taken away. So I'm in the process of creating a little raft so it can rise it can rise and
So
fall
sweet.
with the waters, because I do love it so much. Yeah.
I love that.
In the past, Daisy, you have talked about, this idea that, we should all be seeding wonderful wild foods and medicines in common areas, which now are often state forests and, reserves and national parks. So as a kind of, shall we say, increasing resilience in the event that, food becomes really expensive. I mean, it is already really expensive. Imagine if food triples in price, or herbal medicine even, like I can't, in the last 5 years, the steady increase of prices in the herbal medicines I'm buying is quite wild. So it's a controversial idea, and I want to put that on the table, as in like future proofing ourselves through, I guess, entering into this more of this co-created landscape, like the commons, where people are planting but harvesting. It's partly wild, it's partly human supported. I'll put that on the table as a controversial idea.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to know the nature of the plant that you're doing, and how it moves on the environment.
In the specific environment that you find yourself in, because I think it'd be very hard for me to even grow one hawthorn, tending it carefully here, let alone turn it into an invasive weed
Yeah,
in this place.
yeah.
And likewise, there's probably other things here that could be quite problematic that would not be in Victoria.
This is something that I think of quite often as well, is creating a little bit more wildcrafting networks for people. I have lots of ideas, by the way. I don't have all the time to implement all of my ideas, but I would really like to see that happening more. For example, blue lily does not grow here for me, but as herbalists and herbalists that are within so-called Australia, using our creating our own dispensaries, it would be really lovely to have exchanges, wildcrafting exchanges, where, if I've got so many hawthorns here that I could send to my fellow herbalists for their medicines, and they have things growing near them that they could send vice versa. And I would really like to see, I know that obviously they've still got the embodied energy costs and things like that, but it's much different to something like, for example, getting chamomile from Egypt, or hibiscus is another one that's grown in Egypt. And our this is going into herbalism, kind of the herbalism industry a little bit more, not necessarily just wildcrafting. But I am a really big believer of wildcrafting being an act of rebellion within the herbal industry, even because our our industry is so global now and is actually really fragile. I mean, we saw this during COVID, when like everyone just started buying elderberry and there was no elderberry around. And, I have elderberries all around me. And that, to me, really showed me how, how much kind of wealth I had in that way, and how resilient I was within that framework. But I really am an advocate for localizing herbalism as much as we can. And I think that wildcrafting is an act to help people to actually do that, to help people practice that. Yeah.
I love that. And I think traditionally, when we look at our Aboriginal cultures, there would be once a year or once every bi-yearly, they would come together from these different regions and do their trades and exchanges, so we could exchange. Like I'm harvesting lily all the time. I would love to have some of your hawthorn berry. My hawthorn flowers but doesn't berry. So and that we do these journeys, that someone, there's a part of the tribe that's sent to go on the journey to meet the others from different regions and do these exchanges of knowledge and plants and I really love that. So
And
it's
surely that's
tricky.
how herbalism has always worked, right? Like even in traditional European herbalism, the wise women, with the witches, the herbalists would travel and would swap with other local herbalists, and then there's a preciousness to the things, that the medicines that you have, like if that's all we had access to, and the only way for me to have hawthorn would be for Taj and I to travel for weeks at a time to meet in the middle, and I give you some godukola and some lily, and you give me some hawthorn and some John's wort, like, and I knew, well, I can't get this again until I do that next year. Or even the ones that I'm like, well, I can't get any more lily until next year because it's not the season, then there's a preciousness. And of course, we're drop dosing. And of course, we're like using single herbs or 2 herbs. We're not using like 15 herbs. You're going to have these 7 herbs in a tea, and then you're going to have a tincture with 6 herbs. You're going to take 5 mils 3 times a day because you just can't afford it. Not in a money sense, in like in availability sense. So I think wildcrafting helps to remap value and worth and wealth, not just time.
I wholeheartedly agree. I think it remaps your values system as well. It's really interesting at the moment. I'm preparing for the Lost Trades Fair, where I'm going to be having a market, and I am advocating for bioregional herbalism. So most of what I am actually producing is what I have grown or wildcrafted myself, which means that, like, it's very kind of like small batch. And I notice how protective I'm getting over some of them. Like I went to go use, I was using a few herbs the other day, hawthorn, and I had this beautiful pink flowered hawthorn flowers as well. And I noticed that it was getting to like the last bit of the jar, and I didn't want to use it. And I was like, oh, I'm feeling so protective over this, especially because they're like, I'm not going to get into it too much, but the global systems seem a little bit more perhaps fragile right now than they have before. And so I feel like I've got all of this wealth in my apothecary that and it's a different feeling as well, because I'm going to be going and selling these medicines. And I know that I would feel different about using that hawthorn if I was giving it away, if someone needed it, or if it was exchanged. If someone came to me and they exchanged, like, oh my God, these are some lilies that I've harvested, or if I knew that they were in need. And it's so different for me. And I think that it has fundamentally changed my value system, being a wildcrafter and a gardener.
And do you think that that change in value system is a kind of change that would support a world that thrives if it happened a bit more globally?
Definitely. I definitely do. I think that people start to value time differently, start to see things as gifts. Nature is very, like, it's inherently anti-capitalistic. You can take a cutting, the seeds just keep going. You get 50 seeds from like one seed at you sometimes, and things like that. And you gardeners are quite often like that. They share. They love to share a cutting. They love to share seeds. They really thrive most of the time on sharing, just like a garden does. And I feel as though that plants, when you're wildcrafting, when you're gardening, they teach you a lot, even about the cycles of life. Gardeners often feel differently about death. And I think that we would live in a completely different world if more people were doing this, because they would start to see their lives and their places within the broader spectrum of our so-called reality a lot differently.
Yeah, that's it. The attunement to the natural cycles of things.
I feel like it's a good point. I want to recommend inside this conversation a great anthropological book. So it's a bit academic, but it's also very interesting if you like kind of heady reads. It's called The Mushroom at the End of the World. It's written by anthropologist Anna Singh. She's a Chinese American anthropologist. So, The Mushroom at the End of the World, on the Possibility of Life in Capitalist Ruins. And she's talking about highly prized, one of the most prized mushrooms in Japanese cuisine. It's called matsutake, and it's impossible to cultivate. It will only grow wild, but it will only grow wild in disturbed landscapes. It's this very interesting, I guess, species that has emerged inside a very particular niche. And so it grows wild through a lot of Oregon, where all the forests were clear felled, and it's now this kind of regrowth pine scrub forest. And she follows, it's like, it's as expensive as gold at the time she wrote it anyway, in 2015. And so there's a lot of the people who then spend their entire time wild harvesting matsutake. There's whole networks of pickers. A lot of them are illegal immigrants, or they are, you know, different kind of disadvantaged communities in the States that can't just go and get a job. So they go with like whole families to camp in the forests of Oregon and go wild harvesting these matsutakis for certain times of the year. There are like renegade traders who will then meet up with all the groups and get them, and then they ship them, wrap them in paper, they get shipped to Japan, so they get there fresh. People pay amazing amounts. And interestingly, the mushroom is nearly always gifted as a sign of respect. So then people are, you know, in Japan are then gifting these incredibly expensive mushrooms to people in their networks. And there's just a quote here. So it's an interesting read for looking at the way that wild harvesting networks intersect with a kind of post-capitalist narrative that interests you. And here's a quote from her. One could say that pines, matsutake, and humans all cultivate each other unintentionally. They make each other's world-making projects possible. Consider how landscapes more generally are products of unintentional design, that is, the overlapping world-making activities of many agents, human and not human. The design is clear in the landscape's ecosystem, but none of the agents have planned this effect. Humans join others in making landscapes of unintentional design. As sites for more than human dramas, landscapes are radical tools for decentering human hubris. Landscapes are not backdrops for human historical action. They are themselves active. Watching landscapes in formation, watching landscapes emerge, shows how humans can join other living beings in shaping worlds. I feel like that points really beautifully, Tash, what you were saying about how, you know, when we're engaging with landscapes, and even what Daisy was saying around planting little bits of watercress or being careful you don't pick some prickly pears here and walk over there to eat them and then spread them, right? Just like the birds spread the canthers everywhere. We still are existing within this narrative that the landscape is out there, and either it's a polluted landscape or it's a pristine landscape, and the humans are somehow outside of that. We are either, you know, creating the landscape of the farm, or we're somehow just visiting and viewing. But actually what she's talking about there is the way that landscapes are actively co-creating each other. The humans, the birds, the plants, the mushrooms are engaging in many different activities, including wildcrafting, that changes the design of that landscape. It reminds me a lot of like fire stick farming in Indigenous cultures, right? That it's like, it's not like the Aboriginal Australians were like, right, we're turning this into a farm and we're going to do it in this way. But there was this overlapping activities between the black cockatoos and the fire, and the way people harvest, and the way that, you know, Indigenous women would harvest things and they'd, you know, stick a stick of whatever that plant was in a ground somewhere to support its growth. That it's not just living on the land with zero action, right? You're still engaging and co-creating what the landscape feels like, just like in the commons.
And I really see that, and nature reminding us of the gold, the treasures that comes from destruction. So we might look at those clear-felled, you know, forests and be absolutely rightfully heartbroken. But in the process of that, nature comes in and offers this incredible uh, regeneration that is worth gold. And so it reminds me of that Japanese art form where they fill the broken pots with the gold. And I think nature does that all the time with the bindies. You know, it's like compacted soil. It's really difficult to grow anything else in, but then you get these like little foundational species that come in and put their deep roots down and protect and create change, create magic, like create life to come back. So just nature reminds us that through every tragedy there are treasures and gold to be taken in that. Yeah.
And also that landscape is a constantly evolving thing, that we have like a fixed Edenic vision in the West of like, oh, the landscapes were all perfect and pristine and then we came and destroyed them all. It's one version of that, right? And it's like, well, they're a constant evolving and changing, responsive, ecosystemic, alive system being, and we're just one part of that. A powerful part that can change a lot, right? But we are just one part of that. I love what you said as well, Daisy, about the bindis, because also the bindis they change animal and human behavior. They say, don't walk here, stop compacting this soil, I'm going to prick your toes. So then the plants are also changing human behavior, right? It's not just, it is multi-directional. And there's a beautiful video that I put a quote to which maps out like systems thinking called How Wolves Change Rivers. And it's about when wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park, how eventually the shapes of the rivers completely changed because the wolves changed the behavior of the deer and the more prey animals, and that changed the way that the plants were growing, and the way the plants were growing were changed how stable the banks were, and the wolves changed the rivers, right? How interconnected all these relationships are.
Yeah, we have at the moment we've got all these thistle seeds going everywhere on the farm, and they're seen as an environmental hazard. They're stunning. They're one of my favorite colors, to be honest. They're flowers, but they're there because the land is so compacted as well. They like growing in compacted soil, and their deep tap roots are actually assisting that soil. And it's just I just do find that very interesting that, and because they're thistles, they do change our behavior and animal behavior. Don't walk here anymore. It's already been walked on so much, and I know that they're seen as a environmental hazard here, and I'm not questioning that. However, I think that a lot of the time people focus on details or elements rather than thinking about the system as a whole. And so not thinking about how well the compaction, and there's certain things that the ripple effects are the issue here. It's not necessarily the plants. And so if we think about it in that context of wolves changing rivers, and we start to actually think more systematically, then I'm just such a big fan of that, like trying to zoom out and have a little bit of a broad way of thinking rather than just blaming an individual plant.
I was on mute. The plant is also an ecological response to what's happening, right? It's the plant is very innately aware of its role inside that web of relationships, and so it's responding as best it can to support the need that is there, that compacted land. And I had never actually thought about the way that thistles and bindis both do that role, and they're both spiky and they change. Especially if we didn't have shoes, we'd be definitely changing where we walk, right?
And that compacted soil is in itself an act of aggression in some ways, that you're taking over, and that those plants generally work with the liver, which holds our resentments and angers, but also at the same time generosity and expansiveness, like through the lens of Chinese medicine. So it's interesting to see those plants that come. It's just that these protectors. It's just like, I need to protect myself here, and that they also give us the medicine of protection within our own body. So I love that.
Yeah, just quickly off that, Daisy, one of the things that I love about what you're saying is that you don't learn those things in books, really. Like you have to go out and have a relationship with the plant, and then you start drawing these conclusions between how the plant is acting within the landscape and how the plant acts within the body. And you start to see that there is truly no separation between that. You draw all of these threads and lines and webs, and it's absolutely fascinating when you start to do that. And that's one of the things that I think that wildcrafting truly gives as a gift.
Yeah.
Beautiful way to rebel against what knowledge is and how we really can get it. That I think that there is a lot of innate wisdom, absolutely, as you're saying, through observation and through observing the way the plant is in its native environment, that we do start to understand aspects of that plant, and then harvesting it and processing it, and what does it feel like in our fingers. And I think all of that is a really beautiful decolonization of knowledge systems as well.
Yeah, the recognition of the systems and the strategies and the symbols. The word's not coming to me, but it's like the signatures of the plants, and how to read those signatures. And that only comes through slowing down and taking time and really deeply listening and noticing over those seasonal changes. Yeah.
So I want to make one last kind of question or point before I summarize and kind of wrap up. And talk about the risks or the concerns with wild harvesting and living in a system that we do where we have private property or we have reserves of different kinds. Is there a legal thing that we should be thinking about when we talk about wild harvesting? Are we legally allowed to walk on other people's land and harvest herbs? What are the legal ramifications of going into a national park and gathering bunya nuts? Do either of you have any thoughts on that?
No, as I go to, I'm kind of rebellious and not really law abiding, so I'm I abide to the laws of nature and really bring that first. Common sense and kindness. It's like, is this someone's personal property? What's the impact of my actions over whether it's legal or not? But that's just me.
No, I love that as well. Like I'm quite. It's funny that we're doing this like wildcrafting as an act of rebellion thing because I'm quite a rebellious creature myself. Because I don't like I don't like not. I will question, and I always have. Like it's a very neurodivergent thing, but you could never tell me no when I was a kid because why? But why no? Like I needed to understand the context of what someone was saying to me and why, or else I would do it to figure out what happened and why, And I think I'm like that in my adult life still to a degree and with my practice. And so I definitely understand, Daisy, what you're saying, that if you have a moral compass and you're also thinking about kindness and you're thinking about, other, yeah, there is other people's property. We have to be aware of that. And there are consequences legally for that too. So we also have to be mindful of these consequences. There's certain environmental consequences. Like if everyone was going to start to wildcraft in national parks, there would be environmental consequences. Like I live in the Macedon Ranges, and people in the city now have seen or know that the pine mushrooms start growing in the autumn. So soon there'll be flocks of people from the city that start coming to the Macedon Ranges, and they've completely decimated it because people are not aware of these natural laws or what to do when you're harvesting mushrooms to make sure that the spores keep spreading, and how to leave enough and all of these kind of things. So people come with their extractive urban mentality, and that there'll be more. Like it's like there's a shelf of mushrooms and they'll just reappear.
One of the rules that I have for myself on private property and personal properties is if the fruits or the things are on the ground and they're not being, it's clearly they're not being harvested, then I feel like that there's space for that. But if I can tell that there's no fruit on the ground and they're clearly being looked after, then that's a sign that, oh, this tree's being cultivated and these people love this and they're actually using it. So for me, it's really about looking at the signs. Is there fruit just wasted on the ground? If there is, that's my green light to go in.
Yeah, beautiful indication, and beautifully said as well, Taj. It makes me think that Ray Thorpe, who Daisy and I both know quite well, founder of Happy High Herbs, he had a slogan for a long time, which is herb lore, Lore, not law, Law. And when I think that points to something, when we lost the commons, we lost this web of mutual responsibility, social obligations, of like understandings of how to respect each other in that space. And we got laws, LAW, instead, a whole host of them. And now that I think it is, you're both pointing to the importance of being willing to challenge these unhealthy legal systems, but then we need to replace that with something. So not just replacing it with individualist entitlement of like, well, I can go anywhere I want, take whatever I want. And we need to slowly start rebuilding lore, LORE, about how to be in healthy relationships with the environment, with the plants, and with each other. Because, of course, Taj, all those people who are in the city and wanting to wild harvest pine mushrooms, on one hand, I celebrate that. I'm like, great, they're going out into nature, they're starting the work of reweaving those relationships and belonging to the land. And there's an absence of lore. So they don't understand that the impacts that they're having, right? So both those things are true. So yeah, I just think I want to leave this discussion on this place of what is the lore, LORE, of wildcrafting, and how do we actively support the development of that kind of lore? And yeah.
And I think it's through podcasts like this where people can be introduced to these, to the lore.
Or maybe we need to do a second part, which is practical how-to and lore, LORE, because I think we've had a really great discussion around some of the exciting ideas. And I think what I've heard, the question started with like wildcrafting as rebellion. What are we rebelling against? What is there? And we've had some incredible ideas come through of like, reweaving ourselves into belonging with nature and the seasons, to, rebelling against the concepts of time that we have been sold and been kind of indoctrinated into, rebelling against the hijacking of our dopamine pathways, like reclaiming our own healthy relationship to dopamine, the sociocultural aspect, and also like rebelling against the hierarchy of knowledge. Yes, we can go out there and observe what we're seeing and be with the plants and learn directly from the plants, right? I spend a lot of time saying that, rather than just some textbook that someone wrote once upon a time, right? They have value too, but reclaiming our ability to learn directly from engagement with landscape, and rebelling against legal structures that are, capitalist and controlling. Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for this rich discussion, and for being willing to just say yes to this kind of experiment of what it's like to really focus on one topic with a few people. Yeah, love you both, love both of your ways of being in the world, and really appreciate there's so much. I'm so early in my wildcrafting journey personally, so I just want to put that on the table for people who might think we're all here being these experienced wildcrafters. And what I've been doing is I've just been starting with like looking around at what's growing, 1 or 2 plants in my area, and just learning about them slowly, right? And that's how I've been starting. And there's heaps, you can find heaps of information online, and it's important, I think, as Taj was saying, look at the medicinal benefit, look at, the environmental impact. Is it really invasive? Do we need to be careful about spreading it? How is there other things to think about, like the hawthorn slug, right? Like you have to look not just at a wildcrafting site or a herbalist site, but also looking at environmental research as well. So taking your time to just build that relationship with that one plant in your local environment. Thanks, Taj.
Absolutely. Yeah, the cultivation of our sensory awareness, the taste, the scent, the tone of the greens, all of these really are the signatures to our safety and vitality. It's been a beautiful conversation.
Thanks. That's us for this moon cycle. I'm so glad you walked into the dark forest with me. This podcast is part of The Elder Tree, a non-profit dedicated to empowering people through grassroots herbal education, weaving a strong community of herbalists, healers and plant folk in Australia. You can head over to theeldertree.org to find out more. If you like this episode, we'd love you to subscribe. And if you know who we should interview next, drop us a line. See you next month, and in the meantime, may you be blessed with good health and many plants.